Hello, and welcome back to It's a Very Exciting Time, a podcast by a UFO nerd and his tolerant friend. My name is Scott, and I've been fascinated by the phenomenon my whole life.
My name is Chuck. I'm an aerospace nerd and a tolerant friend.
We started this podcast because since 2017, there have been shocking revelations, from news of secret Pentagon programs to confirmed videos of astonishing craft. In a nutshell, now that we know the government has recovered non-human technology.
Or at least we will, once we find Brandon Fugal's stolen thumb drive.
It raises a natural question. If UFOs are real, what else? Suddenly, some of these other parts of the phenomenon that seemed unlikely are pulled into the realm of the possible.
I really feel like that should be changed to, and if Kirkpatrick is lying, what else? And they may still be unlikely, but even if it's new science and not aliens.
It's a very exciting time.
Do we want to do the quick reminder about Patreon? I know you had a thing later about that. We talk about that instead.
So we're going to roll right into it. So it's all kind of part of the same. So, usually this is the part of the show where we remind you that, hey, we have a Patreon, which you can find at
patreon.com/very exciting time.
Nicely done.
Yeah.
And normally we post Q&As and extra stuff. But Chuck and I have been talking lately about like what we want the Patreon to be and like what's of value to our community. And we're extremely grateful to those of you who are contributing to the cost of the show. It's great. Thank you so much. We're not looking to get rich off this. We're not looking to like turn a huge profit. But, Patreon has some community tools and stuff. And Chuck, you had some ideas that you wanted to talk about involving creating more of a community discussion space and how we might open that up to more people. You want to talk about that?
Yeah. So a couple of weeks ago, Scott and I were talking about he wasn't subscribed to our Patreon, which I thought was very funny. But I was like, hey, I should make a $0 tier. And I tried, and Patreon was like, no, that's not possible. It's like, what? How is that a thing? And then I realized there already is a $0 tier, but neither of us knew about it. And so one of the things we want to do, I remember reading a comment a while ago from one of the Patreons about how they don't really have a community where they can talk about UFOs. Because there's the UFO subreddit and the alien subreddit, and those have their value, but they're huge. And the UFO subreddit is a little, I don't know, not the greatest place to be in. So
it's like every Reddit. It can be good, but you are wading in the internet.
Yeah, exactly. So that kind of made me realize we probably should make a little community. There are advantages to us. Like I have questions that I would like to ask our audience. But also I know that you all want to talk with other folks who are of a similar kind without having to be in a community of thousands. So I would like to make a Slack or a Discord. Scott has put his thumb heavily on the scale of Slack because he and I are both in Slack all day long.
I'm an old Gen X nerd and I don't understand Discord. My kid uses Discord. I don't get it. But if that's what the people want, we should do Discord.
If you're Gen X, that makes me Gen X, and I'm not comfortable with that. I don't know, man.
You were born before 1980. You're Gen X, my friend. We're cuspers, as Andy likes to say.
You were born before 1980? How old are you?
I'm 46, bud.
You serious? I'm only 41. How did I not know this until now? Okay. Wow, you're totally Gen X.
Well, today we all learned that I'm Gen X and Chuck is a millennial.
Yeah. Okay. Anyway, so point it. I would, if this is interesting to you, I would like to set a goal.
I mean, not this, the community.
Not this part. The community. Show is starting out so good.
It off hot.
Hot,
I think
hot.
what Chuck is trying to get at is we want to offer a community, but we don't want to tie it to you giving us money. We think there's value to this regardless.
Yeah, and also it's going to take a lot of effort on my part. Like setting up a Slack is not challenging, but moderation and like setting community norms actually does take a lot of time and needs active curation, or it'll end up being a shit show like all our favorite subreddits. So I want to set a goal of like, if we can get 30 Patreons, even free tier, then we'll make it happen. It could be either Slack or Discord. I will manually teach Scott how to Discord if we need to. But yeah, I think that's a reasonable goal. We've currently got like 12 or 14 or something, so we're not that far off from it.
Now, you might think, why the hell were Scott and Chuck talking about this? This doesn't sound that complicated. Just do something about it. Part of the problem is we do have people who are paying us money on Patreon, and we didn't want to be like, hey, everybody join the free tier, and have the people who are giving us money feel like they're kind of getting, robbed. So I want to be clear. We are thinking about other ways we can provide value to our paid patrons, who we're extremely grateful for. At the moment, we're doing Q&A. That's going to remain exclusive to paid patrons. Although, again, our lowest patron entrance is $1. So feel free to join at that level. And also, as usual, I will continue threatening to make a couple real weird episodes for patron exclusives about the Law of One, reincarnation, all the more bit of woo things. If there's something you want to see us talk about that's on that side, let us know, because we're starting to think more seriously about making that happen in the coming months.
So one of the questions there, Scott, is like Raw and Law of One, those are going to take like an extra 16 hours of your time, not to mention all the recording time. So like, what would actually make that feel like it paid off for you?
And that's a tough question. To be clear, Chuck is springing this on me, and I am surprised by the question. It's tricky because when we talked about the show early on, I wanted to be clear. I was not looking to monetize it at all. We set up a Patreon basically at the urging of our wives. Not pleased that we skipped that step. And it's great. We are breaking even. The costs of running the show are covered by the Patreon, which is amazing. Thank you all so much. So I don't want to like put a stake in the ground and say, I'll do this if we make X dollars. I think I want to do this regardless, because to me, what those extra episodes is doing is answering the question of, why would you become a paid Patreon versus just doing the free tier? So I think free tier is community. You're getting to join the community. You get to get updates from us and stuff like that. Paid Patreon is you get some exclusive content, at least the Q&A, and very, very likely some extra videos. And I'm not committing to like, we're going to put out an extra video every month or whatever. We've got a few off the top of our head that we'll do, and it's something we're going to start thinking about more moving forward.
Great.
All right.
Okay. Should we dig into this?
Let's dig into this, because, man, have I got a good episode for you today, Chuck.
All right.
So we're going to start with a topic that is near and dear to both of our hearts. Those of you who've been watching the Patreon, as you could tell by everything about us, how we're dressed, how we talk, our entire personality. Chuck and I are huge American football fans. Absolutely wild for the NFL. The pigskin, touchdowns, beer.
Whistling.
Whistling. I don't know. No, I'm fucking around. I don't know anything about American football, but it has intersected with our world recently. Max Crosby, who is a player.
Do you mean intercepted with our?
Yeah. Who is a player for the Las Vegas Raiders, was recently on the Jim Rome show, and he was asked about UFOs. And his answer was, oh, definitely. That's not even a question. I don't want anyone to come after me, but that's public information. It's real. Like, we were literally on a flight back from Miami. We all saw a UFO with our own eyes. And that sounds crazy, but you can ask the pilots, anyone that was there. It was wild. And I seen it. They had no idea what it was. There was nothing on the radar. Nothing. It was like a big shining light going in and out.
My first question is, why is he asking about UFOs? Is this just like a stock question on interview shows?
You know, like, you can only talk about football so long. Eventually, you got to get weird with it. No, there was a reason. Max Crosby has a podcast with him, his brother, a few of his friends. It's mostly about football, as you can imagine.
Okay.
He very recently had an episode where he invited his teammate, Andre James, on the podcast. And they talked for the whole episode about all the stuff they would normally talk about. And right at the very end, the last 30 minutes, Max's brother goes, so Andre, I heard you're a big conspiracy theorist. And everybody goes, oh boy. He goes, what do you find most intriguing? And Andre starts in on this, like, first of all, right out the gate, this is his answer. I truly believe that UFOs are here and they've been here for a long time. Now, I'm going to tell a story. We had just played Miami. We're flying back on the team charter plane. And on our charter flights, the pilots, if they're cool, let us come up there and talk or whatever. So a few of us are up there. We're just talking to the pilots, like, what do these buttons do? What altitude are we flying at? Stuff like
that. What do these buttons do? That is like 100% me. I would be up there like, can I push this?
Right? I can only imagine that the pilots are on the one hand like, hey, man, it's great to have you up here. Let's chat. Long flights are boring. On the other hand, please, God, stop touching things. Those buttons all do. So he says, all of a sudden, all these pilots are coming on the radio transmitter and they're like, hey, do you guys see those lights out there to the northeast? They're giving coordinates like 200 south, blah, blah, blah. And the pilots are looking at us like, you guys see anything over there to the left? And we're all three of us kind of looking out there like, no, we don't see nothing. And they're like, yeah, you know, they're probably just messing with us. You know, they're probably just bored. You know how pilots get. They're up here flying for hours.
Those pilots, such practical jokers, like,
right? Everyone knows if there's one thing you know about pilots, they're extremely whimsical.
Can never trust anything they say on the comms.
He says, so they're being real laid back with it. So we're looking, we don't see nothing. I go back to my seat. Probably 20 minutes goes by. I get a text from AJ and he's like, hey, come up here. We're seeing these lights. And dude, I go up there and immediately I just see this big white light and it's getting bigger and smaller and bigger and smaller. And we're all just like, what the hell is that? And we're talking to the pilots and, you know, they're like, oh, it could be a satellite, just the sun bouncing off a satellite. Probably. It's probably nothing. We don't know what it is. But all of a sudden, this light goes up, down, and then it does like a circle. And we're all looking at each other like, that's not a satellite. And the pilot goes, yeah, that's not a satellite. I don't know what that is.
I feel like I'd be kind of okay until the pilot agreed, and I would just go ballistic. Like, oh my God, what's happening?
Yeah, you're expecting the pilot to be like, no, that's Flight 37 out of Los Angeles. Yeah, right. We know them. It's not a problem. No. Yeah, I don't know what that is.
Oh, yeah.
So the story keeps going. He goes, all of a sudden, another one pops out, like right below it. And they're starting to move kind of like side to side. And the pilots are looking at each other like, you know, they're still being sort of skeptical. They're like, we don't know what that is. They're like, we're flying at 35,000 feet or whatever. And that's pretty far above us. So they're being real skeptical still. And it was one of the weirdest things I've ever seen. And both of the pilots are like, we've been flying for 15 years for the military, and we've never seen anything like this, really.
Wow. That's fascinating. And 35,000 feet is very high. There are very few, even like planes that go above that.
Now, there's one more detail here. Thanks, baby. It gets a little bit better. And he just brought me a soda off screen.
Okay, that makes a lot more sense.
Thanks, Ben. Thanks for responding to my anecdote. So the story keeps going. He says, so we're like, hey, where are we flying? And he was like, well, we're right now in New Mexico, but about 300 miles out that way is Area 51. And I was like, oh, I'm sold. Like, I'm completely sold on this whole conspiracy. What's crazy is we saw this for probably 20, 30 minutes. Dudes were going in and out of the cockpit. I went, Max saw it, bro. Everyone saw it.
Huh. So Area 51, very interesting.
Perfect.
Yeah.
They kept talking for a while. Like, this was the anecdote that I wanted to share, but they talked for a full 30 minutes about it. And it's very clear that Andre James is up on this shit. They talked about Area 51. They talked about Bob Lazar. They talked about military pilot witnesses, you know, like the Tic Tac and stuff. Like, he's clearly like deep in.
That's so funny. You don't think about American football players being deep into what is kind of a cerebral sport, I guess, if you want to call this a sport, but an interest. But you know what? If anyone is going to convince the average American, it's going to be an NFL player.
And that's exactly why I brought this to the show. You know, like we have a running theme on this show of bringing forward surprising or compelling witnesses that, again, the thing I've always said is it's the loss of the X-Files theme factor, right? For a anytime it came up, everybody's giggling, everybody's laughing, the X-Files theme plays, maybe there's a little on-screen graphic of a little green man. Jim Rome asked Max about this because he heard him talking about it on his podcast, and he just asked straight up. There was no podcast, and he just asked straight up, so are UFOs real? Max is like, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And, you know, they're talking straight up.
Yeah.
You know, like all the people in the UFO world kind of know each other and listen to each other. This is a different audience, and I have no idea how it's going out in the NFL world. Maybe they're the laughing stocks. I don't know, but like, and the more people we get talking about this in a non-jokey way, you know, that's a step forward. It's a step in the right direction. So I found it very interesting.
So do you know if Carl Nell, did he respond or do anything with this? Because I feel like his disclosure timeline just got like a major bump.
I have no idea if Carl Nell. This happened very recently, I should point out. It was like days ago that Max had his podcast episode. And then it was a day or two after that he was on the Jim Rose show. So this is a very new story. Maybe next week we'll be like, oh man, that thing blew up.
Yeah. Okay. I look forward to it.
Yeah. Okay. So moving on, we've got another story. This is a little less fun, but it's still a big one. In a nutshell, Lue Elizondo is in the news lately. The Good Trouble Show, which is a UFO journalism podcast hosted by Matt Ford. They do some excellent UFO investigative journalism. They recently did a piece on this kind of complicated scandal involving former ATIP director Lue Elizondo's emails.
This is another, but his emails.
But his emails, kind of.
So have we talked about this before though? I thought Big Daddy Lou was sacred perfect
in our minds. There is contingent out there who views everything Lue Elizondo and those associated with him with extreme skepticism. And there has been a running effort in the community to debunk the fact that Lue Elizondo headed a secret Pentagon program called ATIP. And basically it boils down to when Lue came forward as a whistleblower in 2017, after quitting in protest from his role as director of the Pentagon secret UAP program, the Pentagon responded by denying that the program existed and claimed that all of his emails had been deleted.
Okay. Interesting. So That's sort of like classic, like, oh, sorry, someone fat fingered the backup and accidentally deleted only this one person's files. We don't know what happened, and we definitely don't have a way of getting those back.
Yeah, and this is one of those things, like, usually you'll hear me and Chuck like, I am not a philosopher. I am not a scientist. I am not a doctor. Damn it, Jim.
But we are this.
But we are sysadmins. Mail servers. You don't accidentally delete one person's emails. A whole thing goes missing or not. And there are usually backups. So it's extremely suspect for an organization like the Pentagon, who has tons of legal requirements around keeping things, to claim this. It's even more wild because I just found this out recently. Lue's background is in counterterrorism. Lue was involved in the 9/11 Commission, which means there is specifically a legal requirement to keep his stuff intact because it might be evidence in the trial. So they have maintained that those emails don't exist every time they get a FOIA request. But recently, some of Lue's emails were leaked on Reddit. So God got caught in a lie and kind of grudgingly released this one email. But even there, they were real weird and petulant about it. And they redacted the word ATIP out of the email. Like, okay, yeah, the email exists, but this part you can't see.
Why would they redact ATIP? Wasn't that an acknowledged program?
It is at this point. Lue Elizondo commented on this. He said, I find it perplexing. The Pentagon redacted the word ATIP from my email. There's two reasons to redact information legally. One, it's classified, or two, it's to protect an individual's privacy. Neither is the case here.
Why? Why would they redact? Why would they deny a program? Why pretend they're deleted in the first place? Like, what's going on there?
Now, of course, we don't know, but the obvious answer is to make Lue look like a fraud. A whistleblower comes out. He says he was leading a secret program that the government has spent, 70 years saying there's nothing to this. Every story that ran about Lue in 2017 had to include a Pentagon denial. And for some people, that's enough. We've seen this happen again recently with David Grush, right? Every story about David Grush includes a Pentagon denial. Everything around Arrow saying there's no evidence of aliens, which is used to shut down any evidence of UAP, even though technically those are unrelated. It's like the more that the Pentagon can muddy the waters and say there's nothing to this, the more likely the story will blow over and go away, at least for a big portion of the public. Like, hey, the Pentagon said it's not real. That's good for me.
So do you think that's a way of saying like, okay, yeah, that email was legit, but it wasn't ATIP. All those emails were lost or something?
Maybe. Yeah, it's an extremely bizarre reaction, right? But in a nutshell, they were caught lying about it. So there's been this whole scandal for, a few weeks now, everybody talking about this. But the reason I'm bringing it up is something weird that happened when it came up on the Good Trouble Show. So the Good Trouble Show, like I said, dedicated an episode to this topic, and they got some statements from Lue about this. So Lue gave them 4 paragraphs on the topic. The 4th paragraph was real interesting. To add insult to injury, I was notified yesterday that there may be a personal threat against myself and several other whistleblowers formerly associated with the UAP effort for the U.S. government. As such, I would like to make this perfectly clear to the American people. I am not prone to accidents. I am not suicidal. I am not abusing drugs. I am not engaged in any illicit activities. If something happens to me or my family members in the future, you will know what happened.
Woof. I hope I never have to make a statement like that.
Right?
The one thing I wonder about, though, is how is this different from other threats? I thought all the whistleblowers already receive threats.
That's a great question. And the short answer is we have heard that there are threats, but it's been kind of danced around. David Grush in particular has mentioned threats, but he has been very clear to say, I can't talk about it because there's an investigation happening. And everywhere else we've heard about it, it's been kind of implied or inferred, or like Lue is saying here, there are threats against other whistleblowers as well. We don't know who those whistleblowers are or the nature of threats. So this is, it's not the first time we've heard like direct confirmation from a person, but it's certainly one of the biggest ones. And combined with the, yo, I'm not suicidal. I don't think that's something you say to a threat you don't take seriously. That's something you say when you're worried you might be disappeared. You know, like, hey, just so everyone knows, I'm not suicidal. Like, whoa, okay. What is happening that you feel the need to clarify that, you know? So yeah, a lot of reactions to this in the community. Matthew Pines, a security advisor for Sentinel One, who we've quoted a number of times, said, this must have been no idle threat to warrant someone like Lue, who is a seasoned counterintelligence and counterterrorism officer, who is not prone to paranoia or hyperbole, to make this public statement. It's quite concerning, to say the least. Whistleblower protections exist for a reason.
Yeah. So he's definitely not a lightweight, and the whole time I find myself thinking, maybe he's saying it for that reason. But what you said just a moment ago made me realize that him saying something that big could be making the effect of pointing out that the whistleblower protections aren't working. Like, I think he probably is under threat, which sucks. And it is useful to say that for its own purpose. But Big Daddy Lue always has that like second line purpose of like,
I don't think you're wrong. Yeah. Him and Chris Mellon are used to playing the politics game, and I don't think either of them make a statement without being aware of how it will play in Washington. That said, I am not suicidal is a very clear and direct message, you know?
But the other part is no one would believe it.
Right? David Grush has come out and said, you know, I have received threats. He hasn't felt the need to say, I'm not suicidal. And you say no one would believe it, but 2 different Boeing whistleblowers have died under suspicious circumstances. And it's probably not Boeing killing off whistleblowers, but it's extremely suspect. And in both cases, the police have been like, no, there was a suicide note. You know, the circumstances are clear, but like, I don't know, man.
That's my point.
Yeah.
Like, even if they had said it, like, would the police ever believe it?
Oh, would the police believe it? No, of course not. But that's because the police are terrible at their job and not worth keeping around. But that's a different podcast.
That's a different podcast, yeah.
Merrick von Rennenkampf, who is my favorite name to read. I love this guy. Former DOD official, confirmed the threat against Lue. He said, I do not post this lightly. I have been made aware of specific credible threat against Lue Elizondo.
So we're not talking about like husky breathing on the other end of the phone line, or it's like specific and credible, which is kind of it's like the terms Grush used almost.
Very similar. Yeah, it's true. And that's what the ICIG said about it. What was it? It was urgent and was it
urgent
also
and credible?
Urgent and credible. But yeah, I think that's worth noting because there's lots of things that count as threats, and we're about to talk about an example. I would not call specific and like, you know, credible. It's more of an inferred threat. You know, a black van following you everywhere you go is a threat, but it's not like, I know for a fact these guys are trying to kill me, I better tell people. It's like, yeah, this is weird, threatening behavior. Specific and credible implies like, there's an investigation, there was a threat made, there was a bomb scare, or something like that, you know? I suspect these are different categories of threats.
Yeah. Okay.
So Gary Nolan, our favorite scientist, founder of the Soul Foundation, was asked recently if these kind of threats could stop other whistleblowers from coming forward. And Gary said, well, it certainly casts a pall. I know the certain incident that Lue is discussing. It's real. It's ongoing. It's pretty serious. And he says, look, I got a phone call myself at one point, basically telling me to be careful how I was talking about things. And I'm not going to go into the specifics of what was said and all the rest, but it shook me. It was a call from somebody in the government or representing what was being said in certain circles. And it was a threat. And that was the first time I ever felt that this was getting personal. And it wasn't a threat by them. It was just telling me that the way I was talking about things, I needed to be careful because there are others who will.
So, wow, that's interesting. So Grush was also threatened, right?
Mm-hmm. Nolan talked about that a little bit. He said, at the SALT conference, I was asked, what's the best evidence for UFOs? And I said, it's what your government is doing about it. The pretzels that they twist themselves into to not talk about it or dance around the subject. I mean, if there's nothing there, release the data. I mean, that's just a fact. If there's nothing there, release the data. Why are you acting so guilty? And one of the acts is threatening people. I mean, that's what David Grush filed his complaint about. He didn't file a complaint to say there are UAP. That's not a whistleblower. That's not whistleblowing. Whistleblowing is about reporting an illegality. You cannot whistleblow just because you know something. You can only whistleblow if it's an illegality.
Yeah. So about like releasing the data, I feel like there are reasons for for an entity like the government to twist themselves into pretzels.
Sure.
If they believe catastrophic disclosure can happen, even if there's nothing to it. If there's
a simplistic line here, but, yeah, you're right.
Yeah. But it also feels a little bit like the argument that we shouldn't worry about a pat down from a police officer if we haven't done anything wrong. And only difference is that the position in power is reversed. And I don't know how that affects the ethics of that argument, but it still feels very similar.
A lot, right? Like, if you're talking to, poor people who are constantly being searched by the police, the argument, if you've done nothing wrong, you have nothing to worry about, is clearly bullshit. They are being harassed and they are at higher risk of bullshit arrests and dealing with legal fees. On the other hand, if you apply that logic to corporations and the police themselves and the government, I feel just fine about it. We expect transparency from the government for this reason, because they're prone to doing illegal things when they don't have that oversight. That's why the oversight bodies in Congress exist, is specifically because the CIA was caught doing some really reprehensible shit. Like, you can't be trusted. So
there you go.
But I think the larger point that Gary was making about Grush is really interesting, right? And I think a lot of people forget this, because the reason he came out and shared this stuff was he felt he had a public duty to do so. But that is not why he filed a whistleblower complaint. He filed a complaint with the DOD and was retaliated against and escalated to the intelligence community inspector general about the retaliation and the illegal cover-up. And the ICIG found those complaints compelling and urgent and referred them to Congress immediately. Gary's making a really good point here. Grush's complaint was not, there are UAP. It was, we're being retaliated against for looking into this.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Now, on the Good Trouble show, they had Ross Coulthart on, our favorite Australian journalist. He works at News Nation now. He, you may remember, was the guy who introduced David Grush to the world. He said, it's very hard to overstate the implications of what Lue has told you today. I am amazed he's gone public with it, and I'm very happy to see that he's finally done this, because frankly, I think a lot of this needs to be brought out into the open. because a lot of whistleblowers are being intimidated, threatened, and possibly worse.
Right. Yeah. That's what I see as well. Like, Lue Elizondo is using his position of influence to kind of point out that the congressional whistleblower protections aren't working and possibly aren't backed by the people who could help, like maybe the FBI or the NSA. But for all we know, they could be the problem.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think it's a big problem.
So I want to diverge here real briefly. I got a bizarre text from Chuck this morning. I was in the middle of an unrelated job. I glanced at my phone and saw a notification that said, I asked ChatGPT how to shit up a whistle. And I was like, I don't have time for this. Kept going with what I was doing. And it was only a little less weird. You could probably guess that what he meant to type was shut up a whistle.
Shut up.
But like, he sent me this big thing with ChatGPT with like various techniques to build a silencer for like a penny whistle. Like, what was going on with that, buddy?
Okay. I was trying to come up with well, and you'll see this in just a minute, but I was trying to come up with a clever term for the opposite of a whistleblower. A whistle, you know. I won't tell you the term I had decided on, but I can't ask GPT the opposite of a whistleblower because that doesn't come up with anything. So I was asking GPT to think laterally about how to quiet a whistle, and it suggested some wild options that I find super delightful, like building a pillow fort and playing from inside there. Like,
sure.
Yeah, hell yeah. If I would be strongly conflicted if a masked and mustachioed goon broke into my house, rearranged my furniture, and built a dope pillow fort with a single whistle in the middle and a note attached that said, "Go ahead, you son of a bitch."
Whistle all you want. We've silenced you.
Exactly.
That would make me feel significantly less threatened. Like, oh, these guys are completely inept. Okay. Word.
But on the plus side, I've got a dope pillow fort that I didn't have to build. So great.
Oh, man. A little bit of an awkward transition because we're going from very silly to very serious. But Ross Coulthart continued talking about the nature of threats. And he casually mentioned recently in a keynote address that he has a dead man's switch. He said, and by the way, if anyone ever did decide to push me under a bus, believe me, every name of every person that I've been told, and I haven't been able to verify it all, so I haven't published it, everything that I know will be published by multiple people who I've sent copies of what I have all over the world. I am very mindful of the fact I do know people who have been murdered. And that's a big call. I know people have been murdered to protect the secret.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's the perfect response though, right? The dead man switch is the best way to push back against, I don't know what to call them, whistle whackers, truth tyrants, leak blowers.
So yeah, man, it's one of those things, like, I think it was worth sharing these stories because I have heard them say that the whistleblowers are getting threats, but it wasn't clear to me what the threats were. And in some cases, the threats were explicitly not dangerous things. It was like Grush mentioned that he had his security clearances revoked. Like, okay, that's a threat to your livelihood. It's not like a threat to your life. You know?
Yeah.
And then on the flip side, we've got people like Bob Lazar, who are like, I've got unmarked black vans at all hours of the night. They erased my history. They've made me look like a criminal. But he does look like a criminal, so it's kind of hard to take it seriously. Like, they felt like kind of like deranged ravings. And none of the people that we take really credulously in this field have said anything like very clear about the nature of threats. So Hearing Gary Nolan explicitly mention being warned that it might be dangerous to talk. Hearing Ross Coulthart say, I know people have been murdered to protect this secret, and I have taken steps to ensure that if they kill me, everything I know leaks. And hearing Lue Elizondo say, I am not suicidal. I don't know about you, but for me, those three put together kind of raise the heat in the room a little bit. Makes me take this idea that there is a contingent out there who are willing to do extreme things to keep this secret from breaking. I take that a little more seriously now. Now, obviously, none of this is like actionable. None of this is like, I could take this to a court of law. But if you asked me before, like how confident I was that there were like Men in Black style people who were willing to go out and like bump off a witness before they could tell the truth, I would have been like low confident, like a 4 out of 10, maybe. I think I'm higher now. I think I'm more like a 7 that, yeah, there's something here because none of these three people strike me as people who casually fear things, casually mention, oh yeah, just in case. Like Ross Coulthart has covered some pretty heavy shit in the past, including like interactions with motorcycle gangs in Australia and stuff. He never talked about dead man switches before. That's a new development. Lue Elizondo is a former counterterrorism dude. Like, this is a guy who I imagine knows how to protect himself. And he's worried that he's going to get bumped off and needs to clarify to people. Like, for me, that raises heat. How do you feel about it?
Yeah, it also does to me, but I still think there's much more of an edge of, I've seen a couple articles recently, and a couple studies done about security incidents against like corporations. And the prevailing wisdom is you don't give out any details. Like your legal company will protect certain things under privilege that I've already forgotten. But the primary constraint is that you can't talk about anything. And one of the papers I read recently was about how problematic that's become. And so we don't talk about security breaches generally. But we're starting to see agencies that don't have that particular problem, like non-public companies or government entities, who are sharing details of breaches so that it kind of makes it more obvious that it is actually happening, what kind of happens there, so that if you're breached, you get an idea. I sort of feel like Lue is probably doing something similar. It's not normalizing, it's realizing. I don't know.
Well, he has a platform in a way that a lot of other whistleblowers who have not gone public yet don't have a way to talk about the fact that they've been threatened.
Right.
Luke, so for them.
Yeah. So I think Ross Coulthart may not have said he had a dead man switch when he was working with the biking gang, but I bet he did. And a counterintelligence official probably already was worried about all these other things, and has put in place procedures to deal with that kind of problem. But at the moment, he's got a good emergency, and I think he is not wasting that emergency.
Sure.
Where he might have in the past.
I think the main thing I want to clarify, and I know you well enough to know this is not the point you're making. I don't think you are saying that you think the threat is not real or that he is shameless.
Oh, no, I think it is.
I think you're talking about Lue and Chris Mellon and those kind of guys. They're used to having to play kind of like 3-dimensional chess with Washington, get them to take things seriously. And him saying this out loud probably serves more than one purpose. It is the explicit, obvious reason. Hey, don't believe it if the government knocks me off. but
Right.
also is serving as a voice for other people, et cetera, et cetera.
Who can't say that, right? Like, because they're no longer in government,
Mhm.
they can now say, because government probably has restrictions against what you say. I think you're. What I'm saying is that Lue Elizondo has probably received many death threats in the past. Many of them, urgent, incredible, whatever the phrase was. And this one is during a time when he's no longer restricted by some of the government shackles. And I think he is wise to take that moment to raise the alarm for those who can't.
Right. No, I think you hit the nail on the head. And Ross kind of made this point also. Like, this should be a wake-up call for Congress to take more steps to protect whistleblowers.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
All right. Well, that was a heavy-duty story. I'm glad we talked about it. I think it was really important.
Yeah.
But I've saved something really fun for last, Chuck. Let's get into some juicy drama. How you feel about that?
All right. Let me get my popcorn machine. What's it about?
Okay. So the short version is that the owner of Skinwalker Ranch recently proved that Sean Kirkpatrick lied about attending a meeting about the ranch in 2018.
All right. You hinted about this last time. So, all right, my friend, spin me a yarn about Skinwalker Ranch with lots of background detail.
Yeah, so we've teased Skinwalker Ranch a lot. I've talked about the fact that I have fun watching the show, even if I don't put a whole lot of stock in it. But Skinwalker Ranch is a legit topic in the UFO world, and it's worth like a brief history of Skinwalker Ranch. So Skinwalker Ranch, which is also known as the Sherman Ranch or even just the UFO Ranch, is a 512-acre ranch in Utah with a notable history of paranormal activity dating back to the 1970s, but it gained popular attention from a series of articles by journalist George Knapp in 1996. Now, Robert Bigelow, a real estate developer who would later go on to fund Bigelow Aerospace, and who has had a long interest in UFOs and the paranormal, bought the ranch in 1996 after Knapp's articles were published. Bigelow, the year before, had started a paranormal research group called the National Institute for Discovery Science, or NID, and they began studying the ranch. Now, all of that led to a 2005 book called Hunt for the Skinwalker by George Knapp and NIDS scientist Colm Kelleher. There are so many names in this. I'm so sorry. Defense Intelligence Agency official James Lankatsky read the book, visited the ranch, had a supernatural experience, and he reported that to Bigelow. That led to Bigelow's friend, Senator Harry Reid, in 2007, appropriating $22 million to start a secret Pentagon research program to study UAP, which was OSAP, the Advanced Aerospace Systems Application Program. Now, a portion of OSAP's budget was subcontracted to Bigelow for research into UAP and specifically Skinwalker Ranch, and we found out about $22 million for OSAP in the 2017 New York Times article about Lue Elizondo, which unfortunately conflated the OSAP and ATIP programs, which is still kind of a big, muddy mess. But the short of it is the government was paying Bigelow money to study Skinwalker Ranch.
Makes sense.
2016, Bigelow sold the ranch to another real estate developer, Brandon Fugal, who, if you've watched the show, you'll know who he is. He's the owner of the ranch. He's kind of a funny guy. He clearly believes in this stuff, but he also is like kind of quite pleased to be the kind of guy who travels around in a suit and a personal helicopter and, you know, meets with important people. In 2020, the History Channel started a show called The Secret of Skinwalker Ranch, which is investigating all the unusual phenomena in the area. So there's our kind of history.
Cool. I think I got it. So TLDR, Robert Bigelow's space pillow loving billionaire bought a haunted ranch and had its investigatory wing write a book about it. Then he convinced the Pentagon to fund a secret program to give him money to study it and eventually sold it to another guy who's making a reality series about it.
Got it in one. Nice job.
Great.
So yeah, obviously there's a lot to this story. Any one of those bullet points that I just read could probably be an hour-long discussion on its own, especially the went to the ranch and had a supernatural experience. Like, that was a very short footnote at the whole story. All of that said, we went from George Knapp writing articles about Skinwalker Ranch up to the government investigating it. Now a different dude owns it and is making a reality show. Yeah. Brandon Fugal, the new owner.
So a brief aside, I feel like anytime the History Channel shows up, it's always shenanigans. And I don't know how this happened. When did this happen, do you think? Like,
I don't know, man. Okay. I would love to say pandemic, but it's pre-pandemic. The rise of reality TV was like a drug. You remember what it was like when Facebook made everyone switch to video? And it was an insane decision, but it was all backed by Facebook saying, you're going to make a ton of money by making video. So all these CEOs recalibrated their things, fired all their print journalists, and invested heavily in video production. The whole thing was a bust. There was a similar kind of thing, except it wasn't a bust in the TV world where, hey, you can make reality TV without having to pay writers. Like, it's a cheaper way to make entertainment. You just send cameras out to a place, have people do some wild shit, and pay some editors to put into compelling stories. Somehow that led to History Channel going from a pretty like buttoned up tweed, blazer with corduroy patches talking about World War II to the Ancient Aliens channel and like reality docuseries about paranormal shit. And I say that as some loves shows unironically, but I ain't here to tell you, oh, they're real. They're edited shows for entertainment. Yeah.
So, but you went further in making a whole D&D campaign about the History Channel.
Well, we don't. Okay. The short version is, in the future of this D&D campaign, the History Channel developed time travel technology and started sending drones back into the past to film historical events. But then that turned out to be too expensive. So instead, they started kidnapping the greatest villains in history and making them fight in gladiator combat. And that's where our players came in.
It was an incredible campaign and a total mistake to let the players loose with time travel.
Oof. Mistake was time travel. If you run a D&D campaign, if I can give you one bit of advice, don't introduce time travel as a mechanic to your game.
A giant mess. Anyways, we should probably continue.
So, now that you know the whole background on Skinwalker Ranch and all of that, in April of 2023, so last year, New York Post journalist Stephen Greenstreet interviewed the ranch's new owner, Brandon Fugal, who claimed that he delivered a briefing in 2018 to the Senate Armed Services Committee about Skinwalker Ranch. Now, Brandon Fugal, if you've watched the show at all, as I've said, he strikes me as a guy who likes to feel like he's an important person. He flies everywhere on a private helicopter. He wears nice suits. He likes to talk about the people he met. He bought this ranch from Robert Bigelow that was studied by the government. So I think it's natural for him to be like, oh yeah, the government wanted to talk to me about the ranch. And I think nobody took this story too seriously. It came up and kind of passed. And I think it would have been a nothing burger, except for what happened. So to jump back, so Brandon Fugal's being interviewed. He says, we go into this huge briefing room, and as we commenced the presentation, I was interrupted by a gentleman at the head of the table, and he said, wait, before we proceed any further, I want to establish an understanding. All the gentlemen here, Mr. Fugal, that you're presenting to, are all very well aware of the reality of the UFO phenomenon. So please dispense with any part of your presentation that would seek to convince us of the reality because we already know.
Interesting. I think you remember. I think I remember you talking about that, like a couple weeks ago. Who said that?
Yeah. So Greenstreet asks him who says that, and Fugal kind of tries to play it down. He's like, one of the individuals leading the discussion. But in the video that Greenstreet puts up, he adds some voiceover. He says, a source familiar with this briefing told me it was Sean Kirkpatrick, which Fugal later confirmed.
Fucking Kirkpatrick.
Right?
But okay, so unsurprising that Kirkpatrick is lying, but 2018 is before Arrow. So
Bingo.
like,
yeah. Now that is a very big deal because Kirkpatrick has claimed repeatedly, and in fact, in the same interview with Greenstreet, said he had no interest or involvement with UFOs prior to becoming director of Arrow.
That was a big deal.
Says, seriously, what was he even doing there? How can he say he had no interest or duties regarding UFOs before 2022 if he's attending briefings in 2018 about one of the most famous UFO spots on the planet Earth?
Yeah, seems totally sus.
Yeah. So Greenstreet stays on the story. A few months later, he gets a statement from a Senate Armed Services Committee spokesperson who says, in 2018, Mr. Fugal updated a handful of Senate staffers on plans for his properties. No senators were involved, and no subsequent briefings were held.
What a pointless meeting. But it sounds like what they're saying is, please stop emailing us about Skinwalker Ranch.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
The Pentagon is properly sensing this is a dumb story and we should not engage with it. Yes, there was a meeting. End of discussion. Please go away.
Yeah. Nobody important was there.
But it will not surprise you that the story did not go on.
Yeah, of course.
Weeks ago, Greenstreet interviewed Kirkpatrick, who denied the statement about being aware of the reality of UFOs. Kirkpatrick says, no, I never said that. I attended a briefing at the request of the Senate Armed Services Committee on what was, at that time, associated with the ATIP OSAP research that was going on as an independent outside reviewer, and I gave them my opinions at that time. This was not an official government briefing. This was a briefing by people who were not associated with the government.
Okay, so the briefing was 2018. Lue Elizondo resigned in 2017. Is Kirkpatrick saying ATIP continued after Lue left? I thought it got shut down.
Yeah. Now, Lue has said some version of the same thing. He has claimed that the program continued in some form after he left. So this lends credence to the claim. Yeah. But again, going back to the Pentagon, no such program exists. We don't have any of Lue's emails. Well, now here's, freaking Sean Kirkpatrick seemingly confirming that ATIP OSAP investigations continued, at least in some form, because they were still talking to Brandon Fugal about Skinwalker Ranch, which OSAP was investigating. So everything is super weird. And as usual, Patrick has the advantage of the bully pulpit, right? He's the Pentagon guy. So when you've got Brandon Fugal, known weirdo, says this thing happened, and Kirkpatrick comes out and goes, yeah, no, it didn't. People tend to give Kirkpatrick some weight. Now, here within the UFO community, we're very skeptical of Kirkpatrick, but his word still carries a lot of weight out in the community.
Right.
In a follow-up answer, Greenstreet kind of presses him on this point a little bit. Kirkpatrick kind of restates what he said. He said, I ended up at that briefing because a congressional staffer asked me to attend as an objective third-party scientist to listen to the presentation. I did not know it was about Skinwalker Ranch until later. I don't recall it being referenced by that name during the briefing.
Oh, I didn't even want to be there. I was just doing a favor to a friend. Skinwalker what? Fugal who?
I don't know how he always sounds so whiny.
I know, he really does.
So here's the thing. What is probably not clear to you, because we haven't talked about him a lot, is Stephen Greenstreet is kind of a known crank in the UFO world. Like, people don't give him a whole lot of credit because he's kind of up there with Mick West, like trying to prove that Lue Elizondo is full of shit and everything. To Greenstreet's credit, his journalistic instincts kind of kicked in. He's like, okay, you can't both be telling the truth. So he keeps hammering Kirkpatrick with this point. So later he sends Kirkpatrick the PowerPoint file for Fugal's presentation, which Brandon Fugal has happily shared. Kirkpatrick says, that is not the briefing I recall seeing. The briefing I saw was less polished. That's a lovely bit of shade there, Kirkpatrick.
Yeah, well, right. Informal.
Come to think of it, I don't believe it was 2018 that I attended a briefing on the Hill. I think it would have been 2017. In 2018, I was stationed in Colorado. I don't recall ever meeting Fugal. Maybe he's confusing two meetings.
The way the excuses are compounding, I fully expect it to continue to be like, come to think about it, I'm pretty sure I was dead in 2017. That can't be me.
I was dead at the time, yeah. Here's where this shit goes off in the most satisfying way.
Yeah.
So that was an interview very recently, like in May this year. The next day, Brandon Fugal tweeted proof that Kirkpatrick was at the meeting. He says, on April 19th, 2018, my team from Skinwalker Ranch was asked to provide a confidential briefing in Washington, D.C. to the U.S. Senate Select Committee on Intelligence and the U.S. Armed Services Committee. Sean Kirkpatrick was at the head of the table.
Fugal with the receipts.
Right? Included in the tweet was a photo of the briefing room showing Kirkpatrick the front of the table as Fugal is like pointing at slides.
Oh, shit. It's like, you can't even get more direct. Was the slide up like Skinwalker Ranch?
Basically, yeah. The slide is a little out of focus. But yeah, like the best part is Patrick is looking dead into the camera. Like, and he looks guilty. He's kind of like, now, Fugal notes that the photo was taken without permission, but he clarified that this was not a classified briefing. It was merely confidential, and he did not sign any NDAs. He says, quote, there weren't supposed to be cameras, but I instructed our paralegal to discreetly create a record of it in case I needed it in the future.
Oh, fucking bold.
Right?
But also hilarious, and I'm sure he was glad he did it. Yeah.
So the best part of all of this is Fugal comes out with this, and he is extremely online for a few hours. Like everybody's tweeting at him, asking questions, and he's answering every single one of them, knocking them all down, and his answers are fucking bulletproof. So here are just a few of the things people said to him. Some Twitter rando said, oh, they probably just wanted to meet you and the cast of Skinwalker Ranch. Fugal says, there was no documentary series at the time, and it would be several years after this briefing before I would even go public with my identity as the owner of Skinwalker Ranch and the reality of the investigation.
Shit, you can't claim it's a publicity stunt if it's 2 years before the show.
Right? Another Twitter rando is like, okay, sure, but like, was it clear to everyone that Skinwalker Ranch was the scope of the briefing? Kind of like leaning into Kirkpatrick, like, no, it was about Skinwalker Ranch. Like, did Fugal like sucker punch them with a presentation about his weird ranch? Fugal said, yes, it was crystal clear. The sole purpose of the briefing was to provide an update regarding the research activities and data gathered under my ownership of Skinwalker Ranch. There was obviously advance notice and an agenda circulated. He even included several slides for the presentation, which very clearly say, confidential briefing, Skinwalker Ranch. It's not like fine print, like the title's lie.
That's so perfect. And it makes sense. Like they're paying $22 million for research on this thing. They want a presentation about what they're finding, right?
One other Twitter rando was like, I don't know, this looks like more of an afterthought presentation. One of those, hey guys, want to see what I'm working on kind of things. Fugal says, this was definitely not an afterthought presentation. We were asked to fly across the country to Washington, D.C. to give a detailed briefing regarding my investigation and research at Skinwalker Ranch. It was a 2.5-hour-long presentation with 55 slides and video, and I was accompanied by 3 scientists.
Oh, shit. Yeah. You don't fly someone in to attend a meeting that takes up a third of your day for nothing. Really makes me wonder, like, who exactly is asking for this? Because that would be an interesting, like, lead into, yeah.
Yeah, and it really does make me wonder if Kirkpatrick's correct and some version of ATIP or OSAP continued after Lue left, because that's certainly
Maybe to this day.
Like, the story that we've heard was Harry Reid and his buddies get 22 million together. They create this confidential Pentagon program to investigate stuff. They throw a bunch of money Bigelow's way. And reading between the lines, it kind of seems like they were a little embarrassed at what they got back. They got a bunch of like hypothetical papers about like warp bubbles, teleportation, and dimensional portals and UFO activity. And doesn't seem like it continued after 1 year. Certainly we saw that, you know, Bigelow later sold the ranch. Like, clearly he wasn't continuing to be funny. And Elizondo has always maintained some version of the story that ATIP was a portion of OSAP that kind of spun out after OSAP kind of failed. And ATIP was laser focused on military witnesses, military evidence, military investigations. Whereas, you know, OSAP was like, I don't know, let's look at portals. Let's go to Skinwalker Ranch, you know? So
yeah,
that was always the story I had. But in that world, which makes sense, I want to be clear, like, I don't blame Harry Reid for getting excited about this stuff and paying someone to investigate and then kind of deciding maybe this wasn't a good idea and backing out.
Yeah, right.
But in that world, who is asking for an update years later after Bigelow is no longer the owner of the ranch? It is now in private hands. And Fugal has been very clear. They didn't get any research material from the DIA. Like, it wasn't like the government handed over, you know, what they had or left their data on the ranch. They came in to the ranch and started from scratch in 2016. So in 2018, 2 years later, they ask him for an update. I don't understand who's doing that, you know? So yeah, you hit the nail on the head. There's one more revelation here, which is Fugal claims his room was broken into. Tim McMillan, who we've talked about a little bit before, he's one of the military witnesses. So he asked, and this is very clearly a like setup question. He clearly knew the answer. He was like, can you confirm that all your prepared presentation materials went missing from your hotel room the night before, forcing you to use a backup set for the briefing? God. Fugal says, confirmed. The flash drive containing the briefing was stolen from my room, which was the presidential suite of the Grand Hyatt, Washington, D.C., the morning of the briefing, while locked and attending a quick meeting at my Collier's International D.C. office located nearby.
Oh my God. Did they take anything else?
Fugal says there were many valuables left in the hotel room at 8 a.m. in the morning, including a stack of cash next to the flash drive. Nothing was touched but the flash drive.
Well, that's just sloppy tradecraft. Clearly, they've never seen a cozy murder show. You have to take the cash, mess up the room a bit, make it look like a robbery.
Exactly. Yeah. Look, it feels inept. It's like you're thinking about the pillow for it. Like, we're not even trying. Might as well have left a signed note like, you know, CIA, hey, we borrowed your flash drive.
Gotcha.
Yeah. Fugal says, I reported the situation to hotel security and the front desk. Fortunately, to my surprise and relief, my principal investigator and scientist, Erica Bard, had saved a copy to his laptop the night before, so the briefing was able to proceed.
I can't imagine thinking that you could stop someone presenting by stealing their slides. Like, the USB drive is there for when the internet is too broken to be usable, but it's not where the data actually lives. Like,
exactly. Yeah. such a wild thing. Like, we'll steal his slides. And then he can't tell us what we invited him here to tell us.
It's like
Whole story
stealing
is
his
so
like
fucking
flashcards
weird.
or something.
Oh my God. So Matthew Pines, who we mentioned earlier, security analyst, tweeted, seems like clear circumstantial evidence that Dr. Kirkpatrick had UAPs in his portfolio at least 4 years before being tapped to head Arrow, which cuts against the image portrayed as a neutral scientific and technical intel officer who was brought in to resolve a congressional requirement.
Mhm.
Gary Nolan replied, sure, of the thousands of experts who could have been asked, he was asked to be there, just randomly, and then also randomly assigned to head Arrow. Oops.
God. So yeah, it so continues to raise this question of if Kirkpatrick is willing to blatantly lie about a briefing that nobody really cares about, what else is he willing to lie about? What important things?
Totally. Yeah, someone on Twitter shared Judge Versus stock instructions for juries, which includes this line. If you believe any witness has willfully testified falsely to any significant matter, you may disregard the entire testimony of such witness.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I'm not totally certain that attended a Skinwalker Ranch briefing qualifies as a significant matter, but I agree with the sentiment. We just need to find a photo of him posing next to the button-down alien, with like bunny ears above the alien's head,
Yeah, absolutely. No, I think you hit the nail on the head. Like, the thing for me is this whole thing is so dumb. No one had to say anything. If Kirkpatrick had just never answered any questions about it, no one would have batted an eye. Like, okay, yeah, Brandon Fugal claimed something weird. Have you seen the show? He says some other weird thing. But because they went out of their way to deny it so vociferously and so badly, and were so obviously caught in an easily disproven lie, it not only calls into question everything Kirkpatrick is saying, but also, Frick, gives everything Fugal says a little more credibility.
Which is saying a lot.
Wild, yeah. Like, stuff was pretty low in my book. I liked the show, but I wasn't like, oh man, Fugal said it? Stamp of authority. Yeah, I think the whole thing was best summarized by a tweet that I saw. Adam Goldsack tweeted, I woke up this morning to Brandon Fugal taking a flamethrower to the entire debunker troll syndicate. To which Fugal responded, because remember, he's in extremely online.
Yeah, right.
He says, I'm just sick of the truth being hijacked by a few loudmouthed moron. Enough already. To which Gary Nolan replied, I think you, Chris Mellon, and all of us are at the gloves come off stage of negotiation.
Oh, yeah, gloves off, let's fucking go.
Right? It is a very exciting time. Oh, man. So I hope that was worth getting all the background on Skinwalker Ranch. I have enjoyed this story so much over the week. It's so dumb. It's so pointless. And it's just the perfect kind of end cap to Sean Kirkpatrick's continued, like, there's nothing to see here. Okay. All right. Thank you all for joining us on It's a Very Exciting Time. You can find show notes and more on our website, veryexcitingtime.com, as well as links to our social media and accounts.
And you can email us at scottorchuck@veryexcitingtime.com. And if you'd like to support the show, please check out our Patreon at patreon.com/veryexcitingtime.
And Chuck, as always, my wife thanks you for listening to me talk about UFOs so she doesn't have to.